Greetings, fellow Homo sapiens. Today I'm here with Kristian Montano, the one and only. He is a songwriter, a guitarist, an excellent musician, and also the best mastering engineer in the world. He's the guy that's mastered a bunch of albums and projects I've worked on, and he's the only guy I trust with my mastering. Kristian Montano, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you for having me, man, and thank you for that excellent intro. I hope I can live up to the intro.
You are living up to the intro every day. So you just recently did a podcast which I also appeared on called Secret Sonics, and on that podcast you focused more on mastering because it's like an audio engineering podcast.
Yes.
But even though you're like my mastering guy, I know you. I met you under the context of you being a songwriter and a musician, and I still kind of like think of that as like your main thing, even though maybe in reality, I don't know, you can clarify. But I want to start off asking you more about your songwriting, your music, your band Sun K, and some of the other projects that you have been involved in, if that's cool with you.
Awesome, man. Yeah, absolutely. Let's get into it.
Okay, well, the first question might seem like a really silly question, but I've wondered it for many, many years since I met you, which is that so you're in a band called Sun K.
Yes.
The K in Sun K, does that stand for Christian?
Yeah, it does. It's
That's
a question.
Good, so it clarifies.
Yeah. No, it's a question that when you go through the whole band thing, which I did for years, as you mentioned, as my primary thing, you get asked those questions, like where does a band name come from? What's the meaning behind this record? Mm-hmm. You get asked that stuff so often, and I had this whole prepared blurb thing that was detracting from the self-reference that I just spieled out for years. But no, it's actually a moniker that I'd come up with when Sun K wasn't even a thing. My wife Bailey, she would just call me her Sunny K because I have a bright personality, they say. So
whatever prepared story you had previously, that what you just told me is much nicer. I think I haven't heard your prepared story, but I like that. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I had a similar thing with my moniker, which is for my electronic music. In the beginning, it was kind of thought out and imbued with some meaning in relation to my own identity. And then when I moved to India, I found that it was kind of a corny moniker. So I just changed it. And now the family thing, it's just it's not even meant to have any kind of meaning. It's just an easy to remember, easy kind of name.
Yeah, it's cool. Yeah. And I feel with the spelling you have of it, it just sticks in my brain every time. It's good.
Well, that's good. I mean, that's the best you can hope for, I guess. The Sun K, you're an amazing songwriter. We met under these conditions at a gig back in 2013, and you showed up, and I am not a performer. That is the only gig I've ever played in terms of music that I've had a hand in composing. And I remember you showing up. It was the fall in Toronto, and you showed up with an amp and a guitar and all this stuff on this rolling cart, foldable cart thing, just so much gear. And then I remember when you went on stage, the thing that really sticks in my mind, above and beyond the exceptional songs, was there was a cover, I think, that you did in the middle of your set, and you were talking about, I guess the person who wrote the song, and I don't remember the name of the artist, but I remember it had something like Reverend in the beginning of it.
Oh yeah.
Beginning of the name of, and you said something which I thought was really awesome, which was this guy back in the day, having Reverend in front of your name, if you were, a blues musician or whatever, is similar to if you're a rap artist now and you have a $sign in your name.
And I think I said something like it's Blind Reverend Gary Davis.
Yeah, I just thought that was a great joke. So back to Sun K. Maybe a little bit later I'll ask you about kind of how Sun K came about, but in its current incarnation, how does composition work? Like, I know that you're an excellent songwriter and guitarist. Is it you that's kind of like writing the songs and bringing them to the band, or is it more of like a collaborative process? Are there? I feel like there might be. Is there another guy in the band that also kind of writes songs as well? Like, how does it all fit together?
yes and no. The weird thing actually about Sun K is that we're like kind of on an unannounced hiatus, which I guess I'm kind of announcing right now. But most of the original members have left. And then right in the middle of the pandemic, the other main member, Kevin Butler, he moved to Italy in like June of the pandemic. So he's living there now. But
hang on. Sorry to interrupt you. He moved to Italy in June of the pandemic. Like, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but like Italy, like, I don't know how they're doing now. I feel like they kind of got it pretty hard in the beginning.
Yeah, they did. Yeah. I think everyone in Europe's getting it hard now. It was a wild thing. His girlfriend had this whole move planned. Yeah. In like January, she like kind of randomly got this job in Italy, and they were so excited about it. And he told me, and he was like, "Is everything gonna be okay with Sun K?" And we're in our 30s now, so I was like, "Dude, just like go do your thing, right?" Like Sun K can exist in so many different iterations. Like I can send you demos. I can, So he moved to Italy. But what I can tell you about though, in terms of Sun K, is like the general writing process of how the two previous records existed, and it was semi-collaborational, but. Or collaborative, I should say. But in general, I would write the songs, or at least the meat, and then take it to the guys. I heard something the other day. Actually, have you heard of the band the Black Pumas?
That name sounds familiar, but I don't think I've heard their music.
Dude, such an awesome band from, I think, Texas. The lead singer, whose name is, oddly enough, Eric Burton, but he introduced the band on this live performance. He said, "Hi, my name's Eric Burton. These are my songs, and this is our music."
Huh.
And I love how he said that. And that's kind of what Sun K always was. It was my songs and our music. I wouldn't try to force my will upon the players of like, you must play this part that I played in the demo. But it was like, this is a guideline. This is the general sound that I am listening to in my head. If you can come up with something better, go for it. Even better if it riffs off that idea. But yeah, that was basically it. As a songwriter, you bring the meat and potatoes to the band, and then see if they can dress it up a little bit.
That's a really interesting way of putting it. In the few bands that I've produced, and like the sort of other bands that I've been, that I sort of know of, just being a guy who produces music. That's always an interesting, it's an interesting thing that me as an outsider I've always wondered about, because you have so many different incarnations of like a band writing music, like writing songs like completely together, or like, two members in a band writing together and then the band kind of like making the music, or like, one songwriter that is writing the songs and bringing it to the band. And then even within that last kind of construct, you have songwriters have a variety of attitudes towards the songs they write. Like, some people feel like, these are my babies, and they're really precious about it. And, you'll often hear, like, there are some, front persons of bands that I've heard that'll say, like, they'll sort of like accidentally say, my next single instead of our next single. Yeah. And you kind of get like a little bit of a clue into how they perceive the whole thing. And then, you on the flip side, you have people that are, really salutary towards their collaborators. And that is what you just mentioned about the Black Pumas. I think it's the first time I've heard that type of articulation, and it's a good one.
Yeah.
It's a good one.
I felt like when I heard it, I was kind of thrown. I was like, oh, I hope the band doesn't mind that. And then I was like, wait, if and I was thinking about the bands that I'm involved in, where I'm much more of a passive contributor. I'm more of just like part of the band. And I was like, oh no, I feel like that would actually be such a nice shout out. Yeah. Like I don't need to be recognized for things I didn't contribute, like writing lyrics or writing the chord progression, but like to say for the band leader to say this is our music, I feel like I would be so stoked to play that set, hearing that, like, yeah, damn right. This is our music. Let's show them,
It's a very good, it's a good way to frame it, while still like sort of asserting some, I don't know, identity over the actual songwriting process. I mean, I could ramble about it for a while, but I thank you for bringing that to my attention, and I'll have to go check out the Black Pumas.
Yes, please do.
You mentioned, so Sun K is in a bit of a weird spot. I mean, we've been in the middle of this crazy pandemic for quite some time now. We're sitting here in December of 2020, like, wow, what a year. What was the state of the band in terms of, like I feel like, because I was planning on coming back to Toronto, and I had a flight booked for the most inopportune date of the 24th of March, 2020. Which is hilarious in retrospect. But I feel like I remember there was supposed to be some kind of a show, and am I remembering something incorrectly here?
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah. There was a show April 2nd or something like that, and it was like a week after you would have arrived. Yeah.
I was like looking so forward to like just rocking up in Toronto and like first thing, just being able to go see you guys play. Like, yeah, that would have been excellent.
I think that was going to be like one of our last hurrahs, or at least like not a last hurrah maybe, but just one big show, and then I would have to see where I was. Sun K's been kind of dwindling off for a little while, and as you know, I had my my son in January of last year. Yep. 2020's been, or of this year, I guess. So 2020 has just been a crazy year. It was already going to be very, very wild. But, yeah, as we all know.
Lots of stuff going on.
Yeah.
I kind of want to, so what do you think, do you reckon that you'll retain the sort of, you mentioned that Sun K will continue to, exist in different iterations. What do you, where are you at with that conceptually? Like, are you maybe thinking about writing more? Have you been writing more? Do you find you're writing songs that maybe don't fit into the Sun K construct? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I mean, I feel like my stance on writing is so interesting, especially now that I feel very comfortable in the mastering thing that I've been doing, and it's kind of taken up a large chunk of my life as well as fatherhood. But I had been writing tunes last year, and the tunes that I were writing were, for lack of a better descriptor, kind of more mature, a little less like balls out rock and roll.
Yeah,
kind of. As I talk about my newfound maturity. But yeah, I think that this is weird. Through years of being in the industry and like signing these deals and touring and stuff, I have felt recently like I have a certain amount of like writer's musician trauma. And so I've had this weird like writer's block for quite a while, where I just haven't really felt like doing my own thing. And it's not a bad thing, because it's allowed me to really enjoy playing for other people and just playing guitar to play guitar, or playing piano for artists to play piano. Yeah. And I've just been kind of sitting back and waiting for that creative bug to hit me again. I've written a couple tunes this year, and a couple really good ones, and I have a couple great ideas. And I think my idea of how it's going to work moving forward is, now that I feel so much more secure in the industry, and know, I know quite a few talented people, I kind of want to collect the best songs I have from the last 2 years, over the next 2 years, and find the right producer for each track, and find the right band for each track, and just make like a killer release.
That sounds cool.
Yeah, and just, I feel like now that I'm not like, touring isn't my everything, and making it big isn't my whole like dream, I just want to curate an amazing album, an amazing experience, something that I can really, really put my name on potentially, and just say, this is something that I fully stand behind. So who knows if that'll happen in Sun K's name? Or,
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, it reminds me of. I mean, you mastered an album that I produced for an artist called Short Round.
Yes.
And I spoke to him a few days ago, and he's in a similar space. He's been writing lots during the pandemic, and he's sort of working with like a variety of producers, sort of keeping the same band of musicians mostly, I think. But he's similar to what you described. There's like lots of other stuff in there that I kind of want to tease out of you. You said musician's trauma, and then you said writer's block. And are you referring to those two things as the same thing, or is like this sort of musician's trauma, does that mean something else that sort of led to the writer's block? Or maybe not even.
Yeah, I think it's something else that led to the writer's block. I feel like
Yeah.
I chased being in a band and making that like big. I chased that for like 6 years. You know, I was road dogging. I was signing deals. I was managing the band. Every minute of my life was going into trying to get a broader listener base or trying to meet the right people, trying to write the right song. And there's so much, there's so much rejection you can face as an artist in music, and it can be so crushing because music from an artist standpoint is so personal.
Yep.
And from a consumer standpoint, it is so individual. Like it's so subjective.
And often disposable.
Yeah, and disposable.
Yeah.
And going through that and seeing how people consume your music and sometimes dispose of it, it took so much out of me.
Yeah.
And when things kind of finally started to just kind of trickle, or like taper down with Sun K, and I started kind of wrapping up some loose ends, I just felt this insane sense of relief. Like I was just like,
Interesting.
oh my God, I don't have to worry about emailing the right people or about writing the next best song or about booking a tour or about finding out how I'm going to fund that tour so I can pay these musicians.
Yeah.
And just that weight off for me was like such a relief and let me go and be a part of Jeremie Albino's band playing guitar or Andee, this musician Andee's band playing keyboards or doing the mastering thing. And those things brought me so much joy combined with a sense of relief of not having to put myself out there personally every waking minute of every day, that it just felt like I try not to like ask too many questions. I try to kind of just follow how I feel. That's kind of how I've
That's
always...
all you can do. That's
And I try not to force things. And so when I felt that relief, it was really easy for me to just listen to my body and my mind and say, I don't want to do that right now. I'm not going to do that right now. I'm going to submerge myself in these other things that are giving me so much joy, both creatively and intellectually. And that's kind of where I've been. And then, I think now looking back at that, I can look at that and be like, that is a somewhat traumatic experience that I feel like I am recovering from.
I see. Yeah, I mean, I relate to a lot of what you just said, even though we kind of do different things. There's a lot. So this whole idea of making it big and the effort that goes into sort of like, especially the first few releases that you do as an artist, well, any kind of artist, first few things you create as an artist, right? Yep. They take so much out of you, and they can continue to take a lot out of you, and you can continue. I don't imagine that I'm not going to continue putting a lot of myself into the things I create, but the first few, you really feel like you're laying it all out, like this is, and on top of that, we have a culture, and I think we were brought up in a time where the notion of making it big is even an actual valid notion that we were brought up with. And an interesting thing that's been happening, and I've been sort of trying to wrap my head around, is how the whole nature of being a musician, like a creator of any kind, how that I think is changing. And I mean, for me, I think about it in this very broad historical context, where if you think about this notion of a rock star or a pop star or just a general celebrated musical act, that sort of begins with the with the sort of technology of recording, and then you have like record labels, and then there's this whole industry that comes around it. Then you have a whole team of people trying to maintain a certain image for a certain act.
Yep.
And then the whole revolution of rock and roll starts, and we've been in that, like, obviously this started decades before either of us were born. And we were, I feel like we came of age just as that thing was starting to crest. Is crest the right word? Decrease is what I mean, but
yeah.
Anyway, but
I think crest works.
Yeah, we'll just say that's what that word means. But like, what I'm trying to get at is that, like, this whole thing of, like, making it big, record labels, stars, and what's the counterpoint to the star is the fan, right? Like, that whole paradigm.
Yeah,
I feel like we're moving into an era where, first of all, that whole thing is a blip historically. Like, musicians have always existed, right? There have been, like, folk musicians who is just like, Dave from your village, who, like, after we are done, like, milking the cows and, like, plowing the field,
he's gonna play us a tune.
We're gonna sit around, the porch or the campfire, and Dave is gonna sing us a few songs. He's really good. He's got the best voice out of all of us in the village. There's that, and then there's, like, the composers that you had in, like, Europe, who were, like, members of the elite that had the luxury of learning all these formal systems of composition. So, like, that was a completely different paradigm. And really, just historically, we have this very short span of time, which is the sort of recording age, the recording industry part of it.
Yeah.
And I think we're slowly, so the key point is that we shouldn't expect that to continue indefinitely. And I think we are moving into something new. And the thing that I often think about is, instead of stars and fans, you could go back to something like artist and patron. And that might be a healthier way for all of us to start thinking about it,
Oh man, I hope so. It'd be so good it'd be so good for the musician.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Like, just as you were describing the whole thing of, like, a musician rising to stardom and having fans, just in my mind, hearing it from a different perspective, I'm just like, that sounds so unhealthy.
Yep.
Like, no one should have that.
Well, also, I mean, if you look at the lives of some of the people we admire that came up in this blip of history, right? Like, there's a lot of tragedy going on in there. And it's not as if creatives and artists haven't sort of, there hasn't been this association with a tragic life. That's been there. But there might just be a healthier way to manifest this. And I suspect that sometimes I feel like I'm at odds with, I mean, we have this common trope of, like, okay, like, streaming services don't pay artists enough, which I agree with. And, like, everyone's always exploiting the artist and this and that. But, like, maybe completely separate from that, like, preserving the industry, like, I'm glad people are trying to do it. But just maybe we need to also have just a new framework for how we relate to what we do and how we relate to the people that are nice enough to notice,
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. And like, around the world, like, the sort of paradigm that I mentioned before, Dave from our village, like, now we have these different levels of interconnectedness. Like, there's your community, like, you and I met in Toronto, and so there's like this local geographic sort of radius. But then there's, because of the internet, there's this new dimension of interconnectedness that sort of is global, right? And you can have an artist in one part of the world that really connects with a scene somewhere else. So, like, there's a new type of complexity there as well. But I'm really interested in trying to figure out how we can exist in this new paradigm and not suffer so much from that trauma that you were talking about.
Yeah, totally. I feel like that's an interesting point. And I think that, the internet, while it offers, as we've always discussed, like, a host of problems, it offers a lot of solutions for things as well. And, we're at the cusp of, like, societal changes.
Yep.
It's gonna be wild to see the next couple decades play out.
Yeah, we're here.
But hopefully the right people are making the right changes, or like influencing a positive change. I think discussions like this about being like, we need to have a healthier way of, like, consumption of art for the artist's sake.
Yeah, everyone's sake, really.
That's yeah, for everyone's sake. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's not healthy to like idolize people. Like, no, you know, I always, when musicians get overly political, and everyone's allowed to get political, but when people buy into the politics of a musician, I always think to myself, like, I'm not going to go and ask Noel or like Liam Gallagher what he thinks about COVID. Like, why?
Yeah, of course not.
Why are we trusting these people with like major decisions? They're musicians.
Yeah,
like, ask them what guitar strings to put on your guitar.
It's great. Yeah. Well, it reminds me of that Dave Chappelle line, right? Like, where's Ja Rule? Like, we need to know what Ja Rule thinks about. It's like, but yeah, you're quite right. And I mean, we were talking about this a little bit, you know, over just DMing each other about, like you said, COVID, and there's this a lot of confusion about this vaccine and what we should or shouldn't think about it.
Yeah.
And yeah, there's just so many people making very cavalier statements one way or the other about what we should trust, and it's pretty challenging. I mean, the COVID era has really brought that into focus, how very little certain we can be of things, and it's difficult to figure out who to trust.
Yeah, on the way out here this morning, I was listening to on the drive the podcast you sent me. The Spin Doctors are in, and it talks about that, just like the hijacking of information delivery is just at an all-time high right now.
Yep, it's
and no one. It's like even intelligent. I mean, that sounds wrong. Even people that are in the like news or in, I don't really know how to say it, but I think everyone's just struggling on how to find reliable information. No one knows what's reliable these days with the internet.
Correct. The smartest people I know are unabashedly uncertain.
Yeah.
And the people that seem to be the most foolish seem to be extremely certain. And it sort of goes back to a Bertrand Russell quotation, I think, about the intelligent people usually being full of doubt, and the ignorant people being far too certain. And
you know what, like, convinces people is certainty.
Yeah, we want that.
So
we want
it's
that
like
certainty.
it's such a weird. Yes, we want someone to tell us what is real.
Yep.
You know, and we don't want someone to hem and haw. One of the things they discussed in that podcast was like finding a new format for scientific papers so that people can, like, average, normal, everyday people can consume them.
Yep.
And are not getting their scientific information from, like, as we said, like 280 characters or like a 15-second Instagram story or something like that, you know.
Yeah, correct.
Wild. 2020.
Yeah, yeah, who knows what the next year will bring? It's getting pretty close.
Yeah.
You're in Guelph right now. Is that kind of where you're from?
No, I mean, it's all Southern Ontario, as you know.
Yeah.
My parents, I'm from Oakville. My parents moved to New York City like 8 years ago, and then 3 years ago, my dad retired and moved back.
Okay, cool.
And when they moved back, they settled in Guelph. So.
Do you go to visit the fam like every other weekend, or I mean, is that?
Yeah, pretty much every weekend, every other weekend, especially in like COVID times. It's and with a baby under a year, they've just been so helpful. Like, we have no childcare. There's no escape from this little monster, man.
Well, do you find that it brings the new arrival in your family? Do you find it brings a sort of focus to your life?
Yeah, definitely. It's I think it's one of the large reasons why my mastering's been so successful this year is that it has given me focus and drive. I guess actually just focus, because I've always had drive, but just knowing that I needed to succeed and need to make something happen. Yeah, it's been amazing. It's the greatest thing in the world. I'm exhausted, but it's amazing.
That sounds about right based on the other parents that I know. You are one of a few of my sort of friends that have had kids within the last couple of years. So, I mean, for a guy like me, I mean, I think a lot of people experience sort of an explosion of kids in their sort of network when they're in their late 20s, and then there's another sort of explosion of kids that happens, you know, in the 30s, mid 30s ish.
Yeah.
And being like a freelance artist type person, a lot of my closer contacts have been having kids more recently, and it's pretty cool to see. Like, it seems like when I do get back to Canada eventually, there's going to be a lot of a lot of new faces to meet, and a lot of potential uncle type behavior that I need to learn and incorporate. I want to eventually ask you about mastering, but I'm still like more curious about just like your other creative kind of endeavors. You were talking about how you were kind of relieved when things were starting to wind down with Sun K, and you were just going to go with the sort of like, it's like you described it as writer's block, but like not even in a bad kind of way, which I think is great. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And I've been through similar phases for sure. Like when I first moved to India, I was just like, I don't know what I'm doing. I think I'm just gonna chill and just practice a bit every day.
Yeah, let it come to you.
But yeah, exactly. So it's a more Zen way of doing it. Another thing I wanted to talk to you about is you were mentioning sort of managing things yourself.
Yeah.
And like, I think when we were finishing up the Cognac Net album and getting that mastered, I remember speaking to you at that time, which is like, I think over 2 years ago, maybe. And you were talking about shifting towards managing things yourself. And this is still way back, I guess. Not way back, but a couple years ago.
A few years, yeah.
I suppose you're not doing a lot of that right now, but can you talk a bit about like have you always sort of managed things yourself, or were you kind of working with other people? Did you have to make a transition to managing yourself?
When we first started, and if you have a follow-up question, just feel free to interject. When we first started, I don't know if you know this, you might, but I got quote unquote discovered by Cone McCaslin, the bass player of Sum 41, and he was the one who brought me to a bunch of record labels and kind of started making things happen for me. And we didn't have a manager, so he filled those shoes for about a year, maybe a year and a half, until we were signed, we were recorded, and we were ready to go. And then from that moment on, it was like, okay, Kristian, you're the lead singer, songwriter, and manager of the band. Let's go. And that was wild. That was just like straight into the fire. I remember just having meetings with the label that I was on at the time. And they were like, okay, cool. So like, what are your plans for a tour promo? It's like, I don't know, man. Like, Kevin, can you go do something crazy on Instagram? Hey, look at Kevin. He's dancing there.
He's a crazy guy, Kevin. Not crazy. He's a crazy guy.
And that's, you learn pretty quickly that content is everything. Managers are just like trying to capture everything so that you can get your brand out there as much as possible. But no, it was definitely just something that I had to learn really quickly. And then we were always looking for managers, and no one really wanted to sign us for a while. I think we were a little crazy as a band. And then I worked with a manager for about a year, maybe a year and a half. Didn't really work out. We parted ways, and then I did the full record cycle on Bleeding Hearts, our second album. Which is cool. It's just like a lot of work.
You were managing for the full cycle on your second record.
Yes. So that's like booking tours, chatting with the label, trying to get Spotify placements. Like it's endless the work you can do.
Yep, that's a fact. And so I'm glad you brought it up yourself, because I didn't know to what extent you would be allowed to talk about it, or to what extent you want to talk about it, or affiliated with a label or whatever. But I mean, you mentioned that you kind of like were with a label at one point. You did have a manager, like that didn't work out as you had planned. The thing that I would like to kind of maybe get some insight on is what do you think are the advantages, disadvantages? Do you think there's a better or worse scenario with regards to, whether it's being with a label or whether it's having a manager, those two things separately or together? Is there, from your point of view, like what are the advantages, disadvantages of each? Yeah.
I think the very first thing you have to do as an artist is define your goals. Because a manager and a label can help you get certain goals and certain other goals you don't need. Yeah, that's tough. It's like the label can give you funding to make a record. So if you don't have money to make a record, but you have label interest, they can help you get that step done. You obviously owe them back. You got to be careful of the deals you sign. And labels will get you, I don't know, man. It's such a wild world.
Yeah. These days, I mean, the whole role of labels is it feels different. And the reason why I kind of want to pick your brain about this is because there is so much you can potentially do on your own, where say in the 90s, even just pre-Napster days, certainly pre, the 2000s.
You need someone.
Yeah, you absolutely, to get into a studio to do these things, you absolutely need someone. And then I pretty much, the second I graduated from high school, I graduated in 2001. Since that time, home recording and just the means of production, if I want to get a little bit unnecessarily Marxist, just superficially Marxist, but the means of production for creators, content creators of all kinds, is so accessible now. And so a lot of the things that you might have, traditionally thought of and looked at a label for,
you can do on your own.
You can do on your own, or some guy, and
yeah, exactly. And that's where a manager can come in too.
Yeah, yeah. And so that's the thing. It's what kind of roles do modern labels in this day and age play if there's an artist out there that's sort of considering trying to figure out what to do?
Yeah, there's a lot of connection that they can do. So I think if you want to go the pop route, it's a really good idea to have the whole 9 yards, the trifecta: booking agent, manager, and label.
Right.
Now, I think that if you're a folk musician who just wants to hit the folk world, you can probably be an independent artist, and having a booking agent is going to be so important for you. I think a booking agent is the most important thing. They're the one that's going to get you shows. Good shows too, right?
Yep.
And I feel what a manager does is have a Rolodex. It's similar to how it used to work, but they can call the right people. They can set up, the right YouTube performances or whatever. And get you on the right Spotify playlist by calling the right person. And some of that you can do on your own, but it's hard. It's still hard to get in the door.
Yep.
It's funny because, I was thinking about this yesterday, and I was thinking about how the Napster days, music piracy, was probably actually better for musicians than the digital streaming platform days.
Yep.
I feel we've gone back to a place where somehow payola is a thing again. Getting on Spotify playlists is so much about presenting your music to the right person.
Yep.
And it's so hard to get that right person's email.
Yeah.
And people
they
can
probably
get
got a
lucky.
lot of emails.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So they're only listening to the people they trust to give them good music. So it's wild that it works that way. And there are Spotify algorithms that can recognize quote unquote a hit, where if a lot of it gets playlisted and a lot of people listen to it, add it, love it, it'll get their algorithms going, and then it'll suggest it to the person who curates the. It's such a weird thing, and it's so.
Yeah, that definitely sounds worse.
It's so. I feel it's even worse than it was in the '60s when you could just give a radio DJ a bunch of drugs and be like. Play my buddy's music.
I certainly prefer drugs as a medium of exchange.
Exactly.
There's definitely very specific ways in which it is much worse. Certainly, streaming revenue, the gatekeeping aspect is still there. Even the whole concept of gatekeeping, it's hard to figure out how much of that is okay. Because I guess, for all of us who are involved in music production in one way or another, or performance, you need some kind of a filter. And I guess in the most charitable sense, that's what the role of a gatekeeper is. But that can easily and most often can become,
It's exploited.
yeah, exploited, and other types of things that I can't think of the appropriate words for. But
Yeah.
just even like feeling like you don't know, like you just don't have the juice or the social skills to, or like if you just feel like you're being judged the moment you approach one of these quote unquote gatekeepers.
Yeah.
It's like you feel awkward.
If they don't like your music too, that's just like, oh man, like I'm not worthy of Spotify's playlists, and
Yep.
our overlords have deemed my art to be garbage.
Yep. Or even like I'm not worthy of like being on this particular showcase, like the spot or whatever it is. I remember having experienced certain things like that. I remember when I was in Toronto, especially at that time as more of a hip hop producer, I was like, man, how do I like, is there a place I can showcase my beats, or like, what can I do? And I remember, just getting weird responses from people that are mostly judging you by the way you look and talk, like, oh, we're only like a future beats showcase, only if you fit in with the vibe of our thing, which is also fair enough, I guess, right? It's not, like that makes sense, but it can be disheartening and challenging, and certainly, persistence and tenacity, and being willing to just create stuff regardless of whether regardless of the weird looks that you get from people, that means a lot. And certainly for me, since I've been lucky enough now where, as a producer, when I'm working with other artists, those are usually like serious projects where I'm having to like be fairly professional and put a lot into it and be quite serious about it. And the benefit of that is that my solo music is now, I don't take it as seriously, but in a very good kind of way. Like, I'm just happy to just put it out there. And maybe perhaps, do you find you're experiencing a bit of that now that you have committed so much to the mastering?
Absolutely. I was actually just going to say, it's funny that you brought that up, because I was just thinking the exact same thing. Like, I feel like I enjoy creating my music so much more without having the pressure of like, is so-and-so going to like it? Is the band going to like it? Used to be one of the big things that I'd worry about, which is such a fucked up thing to think about. Like, are my buddies going to think that my art sucks too much to put on the record? Like, oh my God. Like,
no, it's a blessing. It's a blessing.
So not having any of that is so nice. Yeah. Now I just have to worry about if my wife thinks it's stupid. No, I'm kidding.
Well, that brings me to another interesting thought, which is, like we put out the things we do, our creative things, and we are existing in a paradigm where we have this one eye towards how many people like it, trying to see if our friends comment on it or share it or whatever. And it can be helpful to realize that, like, you shouldn't expect your friends to be your fans. Yeah. That takes you back to that word fan, right? Like, and what I have found, like, for example, the beat tape that you mastered for me, what I've found is that, like, people, well, thank you so much. It's what I've found is that people who listen to it and like it are not people that I know. And fair enough. Like, I'm 37. Like, if I send that to like a friend of mine, it's like, listen, like, I'm an accountant. I have like 2 kids. Like, I don't have time for this. Like, which is fair as well, right? And then, like, I've been lucky to produce a few different styles of music. But if I'm making like a beat tape that's thoroughly rooted in hip hop, I can't necessarily expect every single one of my friends around the globe to just be into that kind of music. And so there's that as well, and also, like, you don't want your friends to be your fan base, because otherwise it's going to be a really small fan base, or like smaller than you probably want. Like, absolutely, it's so important to define your market and find your fans. Who are they? What kind of person likes the music you make? Yeah, absolutely. And and that's another thing, because see, like, in the beginning, you really do, like, when you're starting out, you really do look to your friends to sort of give you a nod. They're like, hey, good for you, like, because they're the people But definitely, as I've been working with other artists, and as I've sort of relinquished that feeling with regards to my own music, it is really interesting to see how like some person that doesn't know you who finds your music, they are quite into it and they're showing it to their friend, and that can happen and that does happen. And I mean, you know, you take an artist like Mally, who you've been mastering some of the songs for her new album. She's so proactive in doing, like she was doing a lot of what you were describing, you know, just fully managing things on her own and just getting in touch with tons of people. And also she's like super...
She's independent too, right? Is she signed?
Yep.
That's amazing.
Nope. Yeah. And she's also like really creative with, like she's got lots of energy and lots of great ideas. So she's super creative, as I'm sure you've seen with even some of the ideas she's had for visuals and stuff for these 3 singles that we've done. Like each one of the singles, she's managed to like leverage her, you know, following. And in 2 instances, she's managed to create videos and visuals that have been crowdsourced, right?
Wow.
And that's super, super innovative. And so there's lots of potential. There's lots of other things you can be doing.
The thing that's so cool about that too is that it like revs your fans up.
Yep.
Like it gets your fans so much more engaged in it. And that's like, that plays into what I was saying, like find your target audience. If you can define your audience and your fan base, then you can have a successful career without that weird celebrity fame type interaction. It's just people that really, really like what you do and want you to keep doing it. Those people are going to pay for your career.
Yep. And I mean, the next step is to just get used to not saying the word fan, which is like, you know, that like I feel it's a small like semantic thing, but I'm trying to I don't have to deal with it because I'm not the kind of artist that like, you know, I'm a behind the scenes kind of person, but I'm trying to get used to because the concept is different, right? Like a fan and a star, like it has this implicit image where the fan is sort of below the star and the fan is looking up at the star. Whereas like patron, like it kind of almost flips it where it's like the artist is grateful to the patron, you know? And so I like audience instead of the word audience instead of fan base. And that kind of stuff, like it's small, it's little, it might seem insignificant, but I'm trying to figure out how to get this new framework into motion. Yeah.
And I think if you start talking to people like that and just only use those words, you know, eventually it'll hopefully seep into other people's dialogue and then other people's mental, you know, opinions about it or thoughts about fan base versus target audience. So much better. Target audience. Who is your audience?
Yeah. I think the younger generation will probably be able to interface with it more intuitively, because I think that like when we were growing up, I think there was a sort of graduating scale from like, you know, independent artist, you know, or even like, you know, just artist in your hometown to like independent artist to like slightly more to like indie label to like major distribution to like big star, like that. There was a much more of a gradation. I sense I don't necessarily have my finger on the pulse, but my sense is that like now you just have these few mega stars and then almost everybody just seems like an independent artist. Like, that's what it seems like. I don't know how true that is. But you know, it's a paradigm shift.
I think that's good. I like it.
Yeah. So like how long have you been doing the mastering thing? Like, I mean, okay, actually, here's a question that I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
You went to some sort of audio engineering school, right?
I did, yes.
Yeah. And was that like a general program or was it specific for mastering?
Just general. I went to the Ontario Institute for Audio Recording Technology, OART for short. It's an 11-month program, intensive. So you go 11 months, you get it done with, and then they send you off into the field. Right.
So what kind of made you select mastering?
It's such an interesting road. I graduated from OART, and my brother was living in San Francisco, and he knew some dude who drummed at this awesome studio, and this who was like a sommelier at a restaurant that he went to.
Wow.
And through these connections, he got me like an email interview with this studio, Faultline Studios in San Francisco, and they were like, "Cool, yeah, come on down. You can intern here." So I was like, "Oh, okay, cool." I went down and interned there, and after about a week, they made me basically an assistant engineer. So I was setting up all the sessions, placing mics, getting everyone coffee, packing everyone's bowls.
As you do.
As you do. And I was lucky enough in my 6 months there to sit in on a couple mastering sessions. And every time I did, everyone cleared out of the room. And it was just peaceful and quiet. And it was just the engineer in his room trying to make things sound the best. And I was like, this is great. Also, you can finish a song in like an hour. That's even better.
Yeah. If you know what you're doing, you can get through it pretty quick. Like it's a lot quicker than mixing, and certainly a lot quicker than producing something from the beginning.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And I'm often kind of amazed by your turnaround times. I'm aware that mastering is something that can happen quickly, but sometimes it's like I spend so much time fine tuning stuff on my end, and then it's like just a day later, or sometimes just like later in the day. You're just like, hey, here's
should
the
I
first draft.
take longer? Should I make you wait longer and be like, oh man, like I worked 5 days on this track.
No, you don't have to do that. But I really appreciate it. But it's interesting. Also, do you find like if I am mixing or working on something like really intensively? Mm-hmm. Especially as a producer, I'm using like a certain aspect of my creative mind. Certainly creativity goes into mastering as well. But do you find that mastering kind of in any way, does it eat away at your ability to maybe compose something on your own in your free time? Or has there been any conflict between you as a mastering engineer versus you as a guy that wants to write songs?
Not really. It's just like it's kind of a totally different brain for me. It is creative, but mastering I feel like is very technically based in that, a mastering engineer will sit down in their room and listen to a mix. And in your mind, as a mastering engineer, when you hear a mix, you say, okay, cool. This is where it is. This is where it needs to go.
Yeah.
And the creativity lies in how you get to that final product. But ideally that final product is going to sound pretty similar. Not exactly the same. All the top mastering engineers are going to have slightly different sounds, but we're all working towards the same thing. We're all working towards a balanced, punchy, loud final. And then the creativity is in how you get there. I'd say the only deterrent I have in my composition side from mastering is after I finish a full day of listening, I get out of my room and I'm like, I don't want to fucking hear any music. Do not play a single downbeat. Was it in Trailer Park Boys? Not one more note.
Yeah. Well, I've experienced that. I've experienced that myself in different ways. I mean, when I was working at a sort of a Bollywood production house for like a day. I quit the job the next day because I had no desire to sort of make any music at the end of that day. And it was a really long day, and the job would have continued to be like just crazy hours, just pumping out, like music for film, TV ad. And I was like, no, this is going to encroach too much on my actual thing that I love to do, and will probably feel pretty crazy depressed if I don't get to do it.
Yeah.
For me, the voiceovers has really kind of been, a saving grace in that way, because like the only similarity is that like I'm recording, I have to use my DAW, but I've been lucky enough. The voiceover company that I work with, the company that utilizes me for voiceovers, they send me really long scripts. They don't pay me a whole lot, but they send me work like almost every day.
Oh wow!
And I don't even have to do the editing. Like they're technical scripts, sometimes several pages, sometimes like lots and lots of pages, but whatever fuck ups are in there, whatever coughs and everything, like they have to edit it. And so that's great for like daily work. And it just has nothing in common with music production other than just the basic, like plug in my audio interface kind of thing. And I mean, I do other voiceovers that are like more like, okay, they're shorter. I do the editing. I make them sound as snazzy as I can, even with the editing and the plugins and whatnot. And I mean, I charge more for those. But having that regular thing that is not exactly like it doesn't. The best way to say it is it doesn't encroach on that same part of your brain that you use
and it feels like it's still involved in audio engineering too, right? Or like for me in music, and for you, I'm sure, even just having something where you're like, I still get my bread and butter from music engineering.
Yep.
Or maybe it's not your bread and butter, but it's like a saving grace. And then you just have the other shit that you do that's your creative side. For me, the other thing is that like, and I've been so lucky this year, but I've been getting awesome music into master. Like really stuff that like I listen to it and I can't believe that I get to do that. And I feel so fortunate that people trust me to work on amazing music, and I'll come out of my mastering room just like dancing.
Yeah. Well, that's a blessing.
Yeah, it really is. I feel so lucky to do it.
That comes, I mean, it almost just has to come just from experience, right? Like if I look at, say, even how I started, like, working with you, there was the first one, the Roundelay album, back in like 2017, I think. And I didn't know at that time if I was ever going to be allowed to produce another album for anybody else. But then once I got more projects, I was like, it's probably good to have a regular, like it'd be so crazy if it was just a different mastering engineer each time. Like on the one hand, you should be able to adjust. Like if an artist has like a mastering engineer that they like in mind, to be able to work with that. But just sort of the relationship that we've managed to forge in this process. Like I would have considered you a friend before that, but like now we have like a pretty good relationship.
We chat regularly.
We chat pretty regularly, and it's actually like improved our friendship as a result, outside of just, two guys that, work together. But even like, I would even say that I noticed an evolution in our workflow over the last several projects. Like I think you've mastered 4 like full lengths for me, and we're in the middle of mastering this 5th one for Mally. We're sort of doing it in segments, which maybe I want to ask you about a little bit later. But even through this time, like the communication has improved, and you are like, because of our rapport, you're a guy that I like trust. And it's like, hey, listen, like, what do you think of this mix? And like maybe in the beginning, like you might not have said something. Like maybe on the Roundelay record, it might not have even occurred to you to maybe like give too much feedback. But like now, like I feel like even over the course of these projects, like you feel more comfortable to give me feedback, like, hey, like the low end in this one's like a little wonky.
Yeah.
Like, you might want to look at it.
Absolutely.
And that's like a combination of a lot of things. It's a combination of like rapport, but it's also experience from your end, right? Like you just have to put in a certain amount of time in the beginning to just master a bunch of records. And then, hopefully along the way, certain relationships develop. Like, I mean, I would always recommend as a producer and or mixing engineer to have a regular mastering person that you go
to
on a regular basis. For me, that's you. You know what I mean?
Teams win, man. Yeah,
absolutely. And you're the best mastering engineer in the world only because you're my mastering engineer. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah. Well, thank you, but yeah,
that's the way that is.
Yeah, totally. And that's been a little bit newfound for me as well. But my favorite thing about mastering is developing a rapport with the people who send me regular work, and then through that rapport, building more confidence in each other's work. And building more confidence in each other's ability to improve our final product. And you're absolutely right about it being an experience thing. Mastering is definitely something that you have to do for years till I think you even realize what you're doing. And one of the things that I recently learned is that you need to solve issues before it gets in your studio.
Yep.
Or you can, not you need to, but you can. Like, and we've talked about this, like, why not address certain mastering issues in the mix if it's going to yield a better product?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's why I always say to people, like, I want the same thing you do. Like, I was doing a record for someone the other day and they're like, oh my God, I'm so sorry if like the back and forth on this is a little crazy. we were just like working out the sub level and the masters. And I just said, man, like, don't worry. Like, I'm a perfectionist. That's why I'm a mastering engineer. Because
That's fair enough.
putting a bow on this so that you can feel happy and be like, okay, if the perfectionist says it's done, it's done. I'm trying to give you peace of mind. But like, I'm on your team. You know, the only way I'm going to get more clients is if my work sounds amazing. So let's confer. Let's figure out what it is you want to hear, and then I can tell you how we're going to get there.
Cool.
Whether that's changing things in the mix, or whether that's, sit back and let me just give you a couple options here, and you let me know what you like the most.
That's well said. I mean, there's actually so many things I want to ask you about mastering. I'm just going to pick randomly as they come into my mind. So you said
Sweet.
You said give a couple of options. So recently, I was thinking. I mean, we've had, especially with the last few songs that we've done for Mali. I've been thinking about. Well, it's probably the first project I've encountered where all of a sudden we're trying to like turn the loudness down a bit. I remember even like the Cognac Net album, I think the guys asked for it to be a little bit louder.
Louder, yeah.
And so here we are, years of conditioning, even, out before we started being audio people, and especially when you begin and you start out and you're just, how do I get this to be really loud? What can I do to make it loud as whatever I'm hearing in commercial music? And certainly coming up in the 2000s is not a great time to be comparing your loudness to commercial music. And now all of a sudden we find ourselves in an era of loudness penalty and streaming services kind of turning things down. So, I mean, I suspect that that's a good thing. Like, I think it's a good thing. It's probably going to lead to more dynamic sounding final products. But is there any tripwires in there for you with regards to this shift? And I mean, is it an across the board thing? Like what percentage of artists are now all of a sudden, like, when did it start? First of all, like when was the first artist that came? You know what? Actually, we need to bring it down a bit. Are there other artists that are doing it? Is it something that's now becoming more prevalent?
A little bit. I mean, it's weird because I feel like music exists right now. Some of the loudest music that's ever been made exists. I think there was a Shawn Mendes song that I brought into my DAW the other day, or I shot out into my meters, and it was like -5 lufs, which is like insanely loud. Other people do ask for it, but I think what it's doing is actually ending the loudness wars in an interesting way. I'm gonna get into this a little bit.
Go for it.
Normalization exists so that things play back at the exact same volume. So I keep an eye on loudness penalty, but ultimately, if someone has normalization on their Spotify or their title, and you can turn it off, then you can feel comfortable knowing that your music, even if you're getting penalized 3 dB, 4 dB, 5 dB, maybe that's a little excessive, but you're getting penalized so that everything plays at the same volume. So I don't think you necessarily have to worry about penalties that much unless you're slamming the track in like 18 limiters, a Boss Metal Zone, and you're getting penalized 20 dB. It's something that you should keep an eye on as a mastering engineer. Yeah. But the cool thing that I've seen this year that's happening as a result is that things that want to sound loud, things that sound good loud, are getting mastered loudly. Something like Mali's stuff, which I have to say is incredible. I'm so jazzed at the work you guys have sent my way. It's so good. I had to gush there for a second.
Oh, thanks. I appreciate that.
But what in effect has happened is in previous times, I probably would have tried to push it a little louder so that it competed properly at the right level. And loudness penalty was kind of a means for you guys to look at it and be like, whoa, we don't want to be penalized this much. But in effect, what that's also saying is I want my music to be more dynamic.
Yep.
And when you sit back from a limiter like that on music like Mali's, it breathes more. It sounds so much better. And that's actually what I found in doing this, is that the music sounded better when it came back. Now, had we mastered it louder and it was penalized more, honestly, it probably still would have played back at the same level as everything else on Spotify. But having gone through it and done it, I can say that those masters sound better backed off.
Yeah, it's you did excellent work there, and it was fun. When she first brought the loudness penalty thing to my attention, I was like, oh, this is a new challenge. And we actually had to hop on a video call and kind of hash out what it all means, like the philosophical implications. And there can be some mental like, I mean, I'm an easily confused person often, and they're just trying to keep track of, we're turning it up this much, it's going to be penalized this much, but then there's normalization, and so actually we're going to be like to a true peak, like 1 minus 1. Like,
yeah, man, we went through that.
It starts to get confusing. Like, where were we? Which, like, you know. So, I mean, I appreciate you for being patient with us during that time. And
dude, you guys actually made me research this, and I found out so much about normalization standards and the algorithms they use. So, like, honestly, thank you guys. And you'll probably have noticed a shift in my mentality towards it. Because these things are, like, when you guys brought it up, I went into like every mastering forum on Facebook, and on those forums, like, Ian Stewart's a moderator on one of them. He's a big mastering engineer, and Bob Katz will like answer your questions on there.
Bobcat's book, just as an interruption, it's the only mastering book that I ever found that was useful.
It is. I can tell you, it's the only mastering book that's anywhere even close to useful.
Yeah, it's hilarious. There was a time when I was in Toronto and I was looking for just textbooks about mastering, and some of them were just like, they don't tell you anything. Like, it was like, this is a compressor. This is what happens when you. Oh, even the definition of mastering in one of these books was so strange. Like, I can't remember, but it was just a ludicrous definition. Something like, you know, changing settings such that the music sounds better. Some just like really, like, I was like, wow. But then
they're so bad, man.
Yeah. And then I found the Bob Katz book and I read that thing. And I was like, oh wow, I actually am learning something from this. And I don't know if it's in the Bob Katz book or if it was another book. But the only other useful thing I found, because mastering has this reputation of being this like mystical, like, you know what it is, some magical process that, you know, only a few people.
It's the dark arts, right?
Yeah. And the only other thing I found useful, the only other type of literature that I found useful was just reading, and now certainly in the era of YouTube, watching interviews with mastering engineers and say even something like that Attack and Release podcast.
Yeah.
That just like, so you learn so much just from like listening to mastering engineers talk about what they do.
Absolutely.
And some of it still seems outrageous. Like the Attack and Release episode where they're talking about limiters, and the guys are like literally talking about how they use different limiters as to make EQ choices. I'm like, what are you saying? Like, how do you? My ears are not that good.
So we use the same tools, but for different reasons. It's such a weird. It's a really interesting, just like paradox almost, where like we use compression and for EQ. Everything we use is for EQ, basically. Like, you can limit to get more excitement out of a track, and then sometimes you're gonna have to, or like clip it, and then sometimes you're gonna have to add low end or high end with an EQ after you limit or clip because you've lost those frequencies by doing it. But it's gonna make it more exciting overall. EQ wise, dynamically, we just use the exact same tools but for different reasons.
Yeah, and quite differently, and it seems oftentimes more subtly, from what I can tell. I have an interesting question that just came into my mind out of left field. So I have a bunch of these. I think I have at least 2 of these like 16 band limiters, like from Waves, that are just, the controls are totally strange, and I still don't.
16 band.
Yeah, so your reaction is interesting to me, because like presumably this plugin is for mastering. That's the purpose of it. And it's also presumably, like, if you're using 16 bands as it claims to be, or maybe I'm just remembering this incorrectly. I don't know what I'm doing when I'm putting that plugin at the end of my chain. Like when I'm mastering stuff from myself just for shits, like I put it there at the end just cause I think. Like I don't know. Do you have any experience with this kind of thing? Like, do you even know what I'm talking
A
about?
multi-band limiter?
Yeah.
I don't really use multi-band limiting. It gets dangerous really, really quickly.
Yeah.
They can get really destructive very quickly. My advice for something like that would be use the same ratio on every band. You know, like you kind of want to try to do it, but mimic an actual compressor or limiter to not be very destructive. Because it's going to sound really weird if you start compressing the mid range at like a 6-to-1 ratio for 4 dB, and then compress your low end at a 2-to-1 ratio. It's just like things are just going to start really, really coming apart quickly. I feel like a more interesting thing that I might do is like selective band compression or selective band dynamic processing, where it's like, okay, I want to compress the low mids and then bring them up. And you can either do that with a multi-band by having everything at the same ratio, level, every like attack release settings, but then only dropping the threshold on the band that you want to have limited or compressed.
Basically, you don't need to use every band in your multi-band compressor.
No, I would actually like, unless you're mastering, I would not even use touch anything multi-band. Man, multi-band's still like, I will only use that if I really have to. There's one in my finishing limiter. I use DMG Limitless. And it's like it's actually a multi-band dynamics limiter into a clipper into a transient limiter. But it's like an intelligently designed multi-band. So like I don't even have to like mess with like the actual settings. I kind of mess with the settings of the algorithm that reads what bands need to be limited. And we're talking like minus 0.3 dB kind of thing.
Okay.
Like we deal in like such small things.
Yep. That's a big thing that I certainly notice when I'm listening to mastering engineers talk about stuff. And you know, as a mixing engineer, my decisions and movements have become, if anything, far more extreme as I've continued to do mixing. You know, I'm like cutting and boosting things in extreme proportions.
No, it's interesting. Yeah, multi-bands are wild. They're really cool, but I feel like I do most of my work is in EQ. Like I feel like I incorporated this new thing on my mastering form, just like an onboarding form where I have clients actually select what's most important for them. It's like balance, loudness, or dynamics. Balance being EQ, and like balance is always like the most important thing. You need things for things to be like compressed or limited well. You need them sounding good going into said dynamics. Otherwise, like if your low end is like insane and you're going into a bus compressor or a limiter, you're just gonna smush all that low end together. Like you're gonna gel the bass and the kick drum together.
The thing, another thing I wanted to ask you about the different, so like the whole output format that we're working with and how people are consuming the final product seems to be constantly in flux. And like right now, if you release a song, if you want it to go out on streaming platforms, you have like a distributor, and they will send it out to, let's say, Apple, Spotify, Tidal, so on and so forth. But then you're also kind of obliged to put it up on YouTube, I guess.
Oh, wow.
I guess. I mean, I assume that like, that's something that people would want to do. And then there's like platforms that you may or may not be interested in, depending on what style of music you're doing. But I would be, which is something like SoundCloud, which like a distributor is not going to. That's something you upload yourself.
Yeah.
So. Like all these different platforms, all of them have like a different kind of loudness penalty scenario. You can't do much about the ones that are aggregated in terms of a distributor. But would you consider doing something like, hey, like, can I have a separate master for YouTube?
Yep. Yeah, that's
Yeah?
something you can do. I mean, so what you do is that you can preview your masters with the codec that certain streaming platforms use. And I don't think it's going to tell you exactly what the penalty is, but you'll be able to preview what your song sounds like in like the encoding, decoding of YouTube or whatever. And sometimes you can change it slightly. Sometimes that might be more of a loudness thing. YouTube's really weird with loudness. I don't know what.
Can you elaborate on that?
I feel like they penalize things the absolute most. Like everything is music gets brought down so much by YouTube, so much more than everything else I've noticed. Both like with my ears and experience, and on loudness penalty. But also, have you noticed that commercials are like 4 times as loud as any video on YouTube?
Yep.
It is like who is in charge of normalization? You're gonna wake my baby up.
That's
every single time.
The whole world of YouTube ads is also really strange. I mean, they're ramping it up. Like the amount of ads that show up it's increasing all the time, and I guess they're trying really hard to funnel people into this, paid version of YouTube. I don't know what it's called. YouTube something, I guess. YouTube Plus. I don't know. I just made that up.
It is something like that, though.
Yeah. And I'm getting to the point where I'm considering it because there's just so many ads. And what's also kind of awkward in the sort of era where ads are really tailored specifically to you is, like you have a friend, you want to show them something on YouTube, and then like there's this very strangely specific ad that's targeted towards you that shows up in the middle of the video that, it's like
turn Siri off your phone.
yeah, there's that, right? So it's strange. Do you think that like getting a separate version of a song mastered for YouTube, even if it's just as simple as just adjusting the loudness, is that something worth doing, you reckon? Or
I think it's unnecessary. As I said earlier, I think normalization exists so that everything does play back at the same volume. If something's mastered poorly, then you will get penalized more, or you'll get playback issues. But I think due to the fact that everyone's music gets the same normalization treatment, we don't need to worry too much about that kind of thing. I do wish that these platforms would all confer and just agree on one thing.
Yep.
Or there was like a licensing body or something like that was like, this is this is the standard, guys. Okay, like just do this.
Yeah.
And that's why my opinions on things like loudness penalty have changed so much, even over the year.
Yeah.
And like if you listen to things like Attack and Release Show, like they in the last 2 years of episodes, their opinions change on it. We're all navigating a new territory, and for a while it was really deemed important to like check out every codec that you were going to get streamed to and make sure it sounds good on that platform. But when everyone's changing their algorithm for how they calculate normalization, every year, it's just, you can't keep up. So at the end of the day, make a good sounding master, and that's going to sound good on everything.
Yeah. It's almost like, I mean, if this platforms are changing their algorithms on a regular basis, then it's almost like, it's I can't think of the word. It's almost their responsibility to make sure that they're doing justice to the entire catalog of music that exists, rather than mastering engineers scrambling to figure out
our music.
Yeah. Well, that's wow. Who would have thought? It doesn't sound like something they're going to start doing anytime soon, I guess. The counterpoint to that, I guess, is something like Bandcamp, which seems to be a good type of alternative, that they're trying to do something different. And it's that kind of service works well for people that want a little something extra as well. I don't know how familiar you are with Bandcamp, but when I was uploading my beat tape to Bandcamp, they give you this option of, including like some files of extra media that you can kind of provide. And I think
awesome.
Something as simple as that is quite cool. I made like just a really simple PDF, like interactive graphical PDF that links back to the to the source material of the beat tape. So
That's so cool.
that kind of stuff is cool. I'll send you the PDF just because I guess you just in case you want
please
it.
do.
And you're gonna get. I got to send you the second part of this beat tape soon. It's like getting done.
Sweet.
It's getting close
Yeah,
to
I've been
done.
excited for that one. That's the like 90s Toronto musicians one, right? Or 2000s?
Yeah. It's like mid 90s to mid 2000s that like that's the music that comes from Toronto. Like that's the source material, but the sound and approach is very much similar to the Sleepless in Ontario West beat tape. And the two ideas sort of just came about by accident. I was sort of just trying to practice sampling. Like sampling was not something that I used to do a whole lot earlier. And so, yeah, I just wanted to learn some new techniques. So I'm excited to get this beat tape sent off to you, and then I can continue with some of the other experimentation that I've been doing. That's just
Man, I'm so stoked to hear
stuff that's fun for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'm stoked to get you to hear it because then it'll shortly after that be mastered.
Be done.
Yeah. It's good to get these things kind of like done, and it's like a nice feeling, when you get it out of the way.
You know what, like, I think one of my favorite things about mastering is that like you give an artist this sense of relief that they can't get anywhere else.
Yeah,
you
true.
are the one that tells them that it's done. And like, sometimes I feel like a mixer or like the producer gets like rubbed the wrong way. 'Cause like I will have artists like gush and like CC'd an email that like the mixer producer is like CC'd on and be like, oh my God, like you made my work sound incredible. And like, I'm so fortunate and like, oh wow. And I'm just like, oh man, this mixer's probably like, I put in like 150 hours of my life into this. Like,
I know what you're talking about. I mean, the first two albums I produced, I mastered myself. And so I had that, even though I had the full baggage of, just working and working and working and working.
Yeah.
Like I still had that, it's done now. Like here's the final master. And even though I didn't know what the hell I was doing when I was mastering them, it was still like, hey, it's done.
Yeah.
But the last few records, I mean, it's the artists that I've worked with are by and large quite reasonable and nice. But the process of production and the process of production first and foremost is, oftentimes it's very arduous and can seem thankless, even though. I have worked with artists that ultimately are quite salutary to what you're doing. And then even the mixing process, and even more so after moving to India, the sort of standards, the way that the artists here have been pushing me in terms of my mixes, ultimately it's been very good. I mean, I think you would probably attest to the fact that my mixes have improved quite a bit over the 4 or 5 projects that I've sent to you.
Yeah, I mean, they were always good. The stuff you're doing for Mali, like you have a chart-topping mix now.
Yeah, that's actually quite cool. Yeah, I'm still trying to wrap my head around what that means, but yeah, like I said in our DMs, I'm going to chalk it up as a win.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So okay, a few more things I want to ask you about mastering.
Yeah.
The low end is this like always contentious thing. I don't know if contentious is the right word, but it's the thing that we rack our brains about, worry about. It's taken me years to figure out, wherever it is that I'm at with low end, which may not be at any type of pinnacle, but it's just constantly shifting, like how I think about low end, how I think about subs in relation to. Here's another thing. Let's clear up. When you say low mids, what frequency range are you talking about?
Like 200 to 600.
So then what's, whoa, okay, wow. So what's before that? What's the word for what?
Like for beneath that, like I'd say something like along the lines of like 50 to, let's say 200 or 80 to 200 is low end.
Yeah.
And then below that would be sub.
Sub, okay, cool. So that's helpful. I certainly wouldn't have guessed that that's how you conceptualize it. So, I mean, even figuring out the relationship of the subs with regards to the low end is it has been a roller coaster for me trying to figure all that out. And even how you compress subs, especially in electronic music, I think almost all electronic producers go through that experience of hearing their music on a large club system for the first time and realizing that they kind of blew it on the subs and stuff. So there's the whole category of electronic music, which has a lot of diversity within it, and then there's everything that's not electronic music, whether it be your rock or folk or country or metal or what have you. And even in rock recordings now, because of recording technology, you're able to capture like a lot of sub and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So how do you, it might just be too complex of a topic to get into, but I'd be interested to hear how you think about low end, certainly something like sub versus the low end, how to balance and compress those things, and how that might differ from electronic to more organic types of music, and if there is even a role for subs in something very, very organic. Like what can you say about that?
Yeah, there is, if the artist wants there to be, I try to not to make those decisions. If an artist gives me something that's really sub heavy in like a folk song, but they want it to be there, I'll find a way to make it fit and not sound awkward. Low end is such an interesting thing because I feel like in the mastering world, it's like problems number 1, 2, and 3 that I get in. And it's not a bad thing. It's just that most mixers don't have a playback system that goes beneath 50 or 60 hertz. And those frequencies actually, in an interesting way, we're dealing with those in pop music for like the first time. Like we haven't really dealt with that extension to like 20 hertz to 40 hertz until this past decade, I'd say.
I would agree with that.
Because before, even like 40 hertz is low.
Very low. Very low.
Like that's still, and then 20 hertz is an entire octave below that.
Fair enough. I mean,
so we're dealing with an entire octave. It seems
like a
small,
small range. It's huge.
It's a whole scale. It's a whole octave of music that we're dealing with.
That's
for the
first time I'm realizing that. Thank you for
it's crazy, right?
Mentioning it. Yeah. Damn.
Yeah. So in that sense, it's like it's cool. Like I love low end, man. I love it wherever someone wants it. It just has to be tastefully done.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, typically if I send a mix note to someone, it'll be like, man, like everything sounds good, but like you need to bring something down, like 50 hertz and below down on this instrument. And the reason you need to do that is because, a lot of people can't hear it, but what they don't realize is that low end eats the most headroom.
Yep.
So like if you want something to get loud, which is in a sense what our job is as a mastering engineer, you need to get rid of that low end. Yeah. And I'd rather not destructively cut it out in a master. But yeah, low end and sub content belongs wherever the artist tells me it belongs, but I have to make it so that it's judiciously done.
Do you think there is? So like let's take electronic music. Let's take something like a really bass heavy, like 808 trap bass, or anything else even, but in the electronic space. Is there a point at which it's like, okay, like this is too much sub? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
You can either turn it down or and what are some ways that you, like, let's say you get a mix and it's the best that the mixer is going to be able to do for you. What are some ways that you're going to be controlling that low end? And low end and the subs? Usually
a low shelf. Sometimes if I have to, it'll be a high pass filter.
Okay.
Which is wild. Some master engineers high pass every tune they get. I think it was Brian Lucy who runs, I think, Magic Soundgarden in LA, and he's a big time guy. He was saying, I saw somewhere he said he high passes everything at 30 hertz.
Yeah.
You don't even need that octave. It's just rumble at a certain point.
Yeah. I've heard high pass at 35 for like rock music and 22 for like electronic. I've heard that said. When I first, like way back, feels like way back now, but like I guess like 10 years ago when I started attempting to try and master things on my own, like the first sort of projects I was trying to put out. I remember reading in some tutorial online, like high pass, below 60, and whatever speakers I was using at that time certainly didn't give me enough feedback to monitor that low. So I was like, okay, sounds sure. That's what this website says. And I had a friend who had gone to mixing, like audio engineering school, and he was like, really, dude, 60? That's like, you're cutting out a lot of like sub, dude. It took,
and that can sound good on certain instruments too, right?
well, instruments. Yeah, I was doing it to the master,
To the mix, right? Yeah.
to the quote unquote master. So that it took me a long time to just get out of that habit, and then for a long time in the mix, I was slicing off huge amounts of sub, because I just never had a really subby system. And then it wasn't until I moved over here and I listened to some of my work compared to other tracks on people's nice sound systems, and I was like, oh man, like huge amounts of sub are missing or just non-existent in my stuff. So
interesting.
I had to like really rethink what I was doing.
It's such an interesting battle because not only do your speakers matter so much, but when you're dealing with that type of low-end content, so does your room.
Yep.
Like low-end gets out of control in a room so fast where it's like, and people are like, well, what about headphones? And like, man, unless you like are willing to spend a bag, no headphone's going to reproduce it accurately enough where you can actually tell the level properly.
Yeah. Well, I believe somebody once told me that the like low end frequencies, like the wave sort of lengths of these are so big that they can, like in a certain rooms, like that's why it changes so much even depending on where you stand in your room, right? Like because it'll bounce.
Yeah, you can be in a node, right?
Yeah, it'll bounce off the wall and then just cancel out. It'll bounce off and maybe in the other kind of way. So that there's all kinds of weird stuff going on there. And there, I am inclined to think that there's a big difference between like a home subwoofer versus like a real, a crazy.
Oh yeah, big time.
So I wanted to ask you another low end question, which is below which, if at all, but below which frequency, which kind of number is it good to just have things in mono?
Probably around 60 hertz.
60? Yeah. Cool.
Yeah,
okay, that's what I was doing. So
and I mean the other thing with that is that like low end is omnidirectional. So like at a certain point having those frequencies in stereo just does nothing except eat headroom or like confuse your side material if you're talking about like mid side.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's
60
another
hertz.
really crazy world. The mid-side stuff.
Oh, yeah.
That stuff really confuses me.
I got a clipper the other day that works in mid-side. I'm like, how the hell does that work, man?
Wow. Yeah, no, I'm scared.
Yeah, mid-side's weird.
I'm scared to go into the mid-side, but I feel like it's more important in the mastering world than it is in the mixing world. So there's so much stuff in terms of in the box that you can get that's like really, really great quality. And then on the other hand, there's this perception like that if you want to do serious work, at least to like clients, you have to like, show clients that you have some kind of outboard something. Yeah. And so given that the quality of stuff, and I think so, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the quality of like plugins are quite high. And so many different kinds that do so many different types of things. So how do you kind of decide what type of outboard things to use and what kind of outboard things to invest in?
I mean, honestly, I think from a mix standpoint, like it's almost not even worth having outboard gear just because of recall.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you said earlier, you kind of want to show your clients that you at least have it. And like, there is a certain amount of like, it's so weird. It's kind of like a privileged industry in a little way. Cause if you can like afford to buy like, I mean, not in a way, and like in so many ways, but if you can afford to buy gear, people are going to think that you're successful. It's,
I've
it's
been
all-
bluffing my way through it without anything. Like I've had less gear than I ever have, and I continue to bluff my way through it somehow. Hopefully, that's because of the work that I do. But
I'm sure I can attest to that.
well, thank you. I just feel like in mastering, it's like even extra. Like like you, for example, you can't get away from the notion of having like a room that's kind of works for you. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
you can't do the nomadic thing that I'm doing. Just mastering records on your headphones on a plane.
Yeah, things you need for mastering are a well-treated room, speakers that match that room, a high-end converter, and you're talking like several $1,000s Canadian. I'm talking
Wow.
for a high-end converter, and that's just so that
Several
you can
$1,000s?
hear. Yeah, and that's just so that you can hear properly.
Interesting.
Now, past that, getting actual analog gear in a mastering chain is like amazing. I could do my job without any outboard gear. Plugins are absolutely incredible these days. But what I can tell you is that it would take me longer to get where I need to go without the gear. The analog gear,
Interesting.
It has like a vibe. It just has this thing that like if you hit transformers and tubes, there is a certain quality to it that some people call bloom, which is, turning those zeros and ones into like an actual waveform.
Yeah.
And it just adds this saturation, this richness. And when I use my Manley Jeremie, which is a variable tube compressor, and honestly, I rarely compress. I'll compress maybe like 50% of the time with it. Often that compression is maybe like a third of a dB.
Okay.
But primarily what I'm doing on that piece of gear is I'm hitting the input at the right level, and then I'm kind of driving into it a little bit and maybe dialing back on my output, and it gets this really, really lovely tube gain, tube saturation. I feel like the stereo image is improved by it. It has this crazy high-end lift. Now, I say crazy, like it's in the mastering world, a crazy high-end lift is like barely measurable, like.
Yeah, it's all super subtle.
Yeah, it's all incredibly subtle, but that's the vibe quality of that analog gear that you're gonna have to work harder to get if you're just using things in the box.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, man, like plugins are crazy these days. Like I do almost, aside from the massive passive that I have, I do most of my EQ in the box. Just because you can do like things like linear phase EQ, which is, like all of the goodness that analog gear and analog EQs have exists because of phase.
Okay.
Because that curve is actually creating like a phase issue within your song, within that band that you're boosting or cutting. And that's the vibe of like a tube EQ. Linear phase EQ is like the most transparent. It's not affecting phase at all. It's literally just the curve you want to do, the amount you want to do at the Q you want to do at the frequency you want. And so if you want transparent in the box is absolutely the best way to go.
Cool. I guess before I let you go, you want to quickly tell me like what some of your go-to plugins are?
Yeah, for sure. Let me think. FabFilter Q3 is an amazing EQ.
Yeah, I'm still using Q2 and I was blown away by it. When I remember before ever using FabFilter and like looking on the webpage, and it's got Pro Q, and these are like Pro. They're expensive-ish, and they're like Pro plugins. That's the what they're marketed as. And I'm looking at the screenshot. I was like, what is so pro about this? Like, why is it pro? And then when I finally purchased like a handful of FabFilter plugins, I was like, oh, like I mean, you use them and you right away you're like, I get it. This is it's quite good. Okay, so the FabFilter Q3 is what you're using right now?
Yes. And the L2, the limiter by FabFilter is amazing. It has a delta button, and the delta is the difference between the signal going in and the signal going out. So basically you can hear what you're cutting off with your limiter.
That's great. Yeah. I have that
and
one as well.
typically what you want is just a transient, right? So if you put on that delta and you're just hearing like a tss, 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 that's probably a good thing. You probably don't want to do anything crazier than that.
Interesting.
Isotope is great. I use the limiter sometimes. I use the dynamic EQ sometimes. Plugin Alliance. They just man, they have so many good products on Plugin Alliance. The AMAC EQ is fantastic. Trying to think of what else. DMG Limitless is a limiter that I use on every single master. I mentioned it earlier. It's absolutely fantastic. I have some UAD stuff, some Rainworks stuff. There's this company, DDMF Audio, that makes a replica of Ian Sefcik's tube compressor, which is called the Magic Death Eye compressor.
Oh, wow. That sounds,
it's
like
so
great compressors. I'm sold on that one already. Oh, there's...
Yeah, go on.
Sorry, go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's like a replica of Fairchild, but he modded it to sound like the old, I think like the old school versions of it, not the remakes. I'm not entirely sure.
Interesting.
I probably just outed myself as a fake right now.
Well, you let me know and I'll cut that part out. Actually, there's one thing I really wanted to ask you as well. If you got to go, you got to go. But if you can answer this would be great.
Oh, good.
So I remember at some point over the last year, you had mentioned about how there are sort of exclusive special DAWs just for mastering.
Yes.
And I was blown away by this concept, although at some level it seems obvious that such things should exist. And you told me the names of at least one, and I've forgotten the name, and just so that I can refer back to this podcast when I want to look this up, because I'm still quite curious about what these DAWs look like and do. What are the names of some of these mastering specific DAWs?
The biggest one is Sequoia. And that's the craziest thing about mastering too, is that we're talking about privilege. This piece of software is worth $3,000.
Nuts.
It's insane.
That's nuts.
And do you know what people use it for primarily? There's a lot of it is workflow. It is obviously for that amount of money, it's a fantastic piece of software. I don't use it because that's a lot of money.
Yep, it is.
But they have something like 25 different fades, shapes. So
it's crazy.
So I literally was reading a post by Bobcats 2 days ago where he was like, I do use Sequoia and I find myself thankfully using it quite often because of the sheer number of options on fade-ins and fade-outs they have on it.
Interesting.
Which is so wild.
Yeah.
That you're spending that kind of money to... I mean, there are other benefits to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, Sequoia is the big one. And the Samplitude, which is also made by the same bigger company, I believe, Magix with an X. Samplitude is, I think it's a lesser level. It might be a mixing one, but some mastering engineers use it as well.
Okay.
But yeah, aside from that, I think Sequoia is the big one that the top dogs use.
Cool. I'm going to look this up online to see if I can find some tutorials or walkthroughs or just a demo of it, because I'm just intrigued.
It's cool
to just even see it.
They had it at Lacquer Channel when I was working there. It's incredibly powerful. But I use Pro Tools in my DAW, and if you're just looking for something to play back and capture, any old DAW like that will do the trick. That can run your plugins, that can do 32-bit, that can do 96 kilohertz,
Cool.
So many levels to it.
Well, I don't want to keep you too long from your weekend with the fam.
Oh, good, man.
I really want to thank you for speaking to me. This has been a lot of fun. It's always good to catch up with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Looking forward to seeing you in person sometime soon, man.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me on, man. It was lovely to chat as always, and I'm sure we'll continue to chat as well.
Yeah, man. As long as I got stuff to send you, and if I don't have stuff to send you, then I'll have to come up with some other excuse to chat with you from time to time. People can find you at Montano Mastering is the kind of name under which you do your mastering. Sun K is
yes
the musical incarnation of many of the songs you've written, and
Yes.
I look forward to hearing. And what are the two bands you play in?
I play guitar for Jeremie Albino. Albino is spelled albino, and Jeremie is with an IE at the end. Y'all should check him out. He's absolutely fantastic. Literally, I have played over 100 shows with this guy and was watching a YouTube video of him yesterday, and I got the chills. Like watching him sing a song that I've heard him sing a million times. The other artist I play for is also unbelievably fantastic. She's the Quebecois singer Andee, spelled with 2 E's. And she's just like an absolute powerhouse of a singer. I also master her music, and she's got a new EP coming out soon. So
Very cool.
heck yeah, check that out.
Cool, man. Well, I'll talk to you later, and if you can send me this audio, preferably via WeTransfer, whenever you get the chance.
Yes, absolutely.
All right, man. Take care. You enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Sweet, thanks so much, man. I'll talk to you soon. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye, Andrew.